So I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. So I'm Felix. I'm data architect at SEGA London. I look after a team of, well, in our team there's 3 data developers, back-end developers that work on our Amazon infrastructure. And we have a data scientist called Stanley, who's sat over there, and we'll also be talking later on. And we have a data developer that works primarily on reporting and analysis. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who SEGA are. I'm going to let you know what kind of data we collect at SEGA, give you an overview of our sales technology, give you an overview of the game analytics technology that we work on, show you some reports and some examples of usage, then also tell you about some future development that we're working on, and then I'll take whatever questions you have at the end, if that's okay. So, SEGA Europe. Most people, when they hear the word SEGA, they think of the early 90s, SEGA Mega Drive. Did anyone here have a SEGA Mega Drive or a Master System? So, yeah, I used to be a massive Mega Drive fan, so when I got the opportunity at SEGA, it was pretty exciting. Unfortunately, SEGA no longer make hardware, so they're now just a video game publisher. So, below SEGA, there is a number of subsidiary studios, including Creative Assembly, which is the largest one of the largest game studios in Britain, Sports Interactive, which make the Football Manager series of games, 2 Point Studios, Relic, Amplitude, and Hardlight. You may or may not have heard of these studios, but they're very big in the games industry, and so SEGA published the titles for those 6 studios. And so as a data architect at SEGA, there's a lot of data at SEGA, but the 2 primary pieces of data that we collect are sales data from the platforms that SEGA publish video games on, so Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, Apple and Android. So we collect sales data from those platforms on a daily basis. And we also harvest a lot of game analytical data from our array of titles. There's over 45 titles currently that we're collecting analytics on, ranging from Football Manager series to the Total War series, Warhammer, Three Kingdoms, Rome, any SEGA game really, all the Sonic titles on PlayStation, etc., on mobile. So I'll just show you a little bit of how the sales data technology works at SEGA. So we basically call a number of APIs daily to collect the data from these platforms. So Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, they make APIs available, and we call those APIs to take down, in general, CSV files from these on a daily basis to see how many copies of all of SEGA's products were sold yesterday. We use SSIS to ingest and perform some basic ETL on that. We then store that in SQL Server, all on-premise, and then we also have an analysis services, Tabular Cube, which people use for reporting. And then various teams of analysts and around the business use whatever tool they find suitable, Power BI, Tableau, Excel, whatever. They plug into this analysis services cube and they can find out exactly how many copies of every single game SEGA made yesterday, and also how much money they made yesterday. So it's very valuable data. We're currently in the process of replacing this on-premise implementation and replacing it with, rather than SSIS, we're using Azure Data Factory to ingest the data automatically. We're then using an Azure SQL Server as opposed to an on-premise SQL Server to take away all the issues with maintenance, etc. And then we're moving away from analysis services on-premise and using analysis services as a service in Azure. And again, people don't really notice any difference. They're connected to Azure rather than an on-premise implementation, but they're still able to use Power BI, Tableau, Excel, etc. to query that data. So that's sales data. The kind of reports that we can get from that, just the white line there is kind of quantity sold. The yellow line is active users so you can kind of work out how many people are buying the game and how many people are playing the game. A breakdown of which country the video games are selling in, how many copies you're selling in whatever country, what payment method people are using, what discount band people are buying the game at. Are they buying it at half price, full price, 75% off, etc. We also have some overview dashboards. All these dashboards are created in Power BI, by the way. That's our primary reporting platform at SEGA. So this just is an overview of a game. Very quickly, at the top left, we have a very quick overview of daily active users. On the right, we have a daily overview of sales. At the bottom left, we have an overview of reviews, so how many positive and negative reviews games are getting on a daily basis. And then you can do some correlation of that with the sales to see whether negative reviews are impacting your sales. And then also, we collect the wish list data, so people add video games to their wish list to potentially purchase later, so you can kind of get an idea of how potentially successful your product might be going forward. To kind of democratise this data around the business, we have the dashboards up around the office on big screens so people can quickly have a look and just see, how did Football Manager perform yesterday? How did Total War perform yesterday? Yeah, so that's how we provide sales data to teams of analysts. We also provide game analytic data to teams of analysts, but also back to the developers that created the game in the first place. This is our games analytic pipeline from a technology point of view. So from all of the SEGA titles, we receive just over 7,000 events every second. We have then a REST API, which is basically a scalable cluster of EC2 instances on Amazon Web Services. As we receive those events, they're all tagged with an IP address of where the event was sent from. We have a service that we've built which translates that IP address into a geographical location, so country, city, town, all the way down to postcode level. We use a service called IP2 location to harvest that data each month. So once the data hits this REST API, it then goes onto a Kinesis stream in Amazon Web Services, and then we use Firehose to take the data off that stream into a processing folder, an S3 bucket in AWS. This step didn't exist until last year, but because of GDPR, which came into place, we had to incorporate an encryption method to our workflow. So we use a Lambda function, some serverless code in AWS to take the files which we've processed and encrypt any PII within those files. So, for instance, email addresses, forenames, surnames, any personal identifiable information all gets encrypted at this stage. So nothing, when it's stored, is actually viewable, is available for human consumption. And that then goes into an encrypted folder. We then have another small bit of serverless code which inserts those files into Redshift. It also puts those files into an S3 archive. That's just in case we get sick of Redshift and want to use another provider such as Snowflake or something like that, in which case we can just take all of our historical data out of the archive and have a new cluster in whatever technology we want. So it's always important to keep an archive of all the data that you processed. And then from Redshift, we either pull the data into analysis services, and we have some cubes available that the end users can plug into and report from. We also use a tool called Azkaban, which I believe was a tool developed by LinkedIn a number of years ago. And fundamentally, it's a script scheduling tool. So we use that to maintain our kind of presentation layer in Redshift. It just runs batch scripts overnight, really, to make the data into a suitable format for developers and analysts to use. And then, as you can see, developers and analysts can either report directly from Redshift, or they can report from the cubes that we make available to them, using, again, the standard set of reporting tools in our organization, Power BI, Tableau, and Excel. Recently we've implemented a kind of another little stage here to our workflow, and that is that we ingest data from the Kinesis stream into Elasticsearch, and that's primarily for feeding data back to our websites in real time, and I'll show you some examples of that later. But obviously Redshift's not really suitable for real-time reporting, whereas Elasticsearch with its APIs it's really good for that, we've found. So that's our technology stack. So some stats, we have over 45 games on the platform, over 500 event types, over 15 million customers that we receive data from, and we currently have over 90 billion events in our historical archive of data. And as mentioned, we receive just over 7,000 events every second to the platform. So collecting this data from all of Sega's titles allows us to create really valuable reports for the business. So this one, for instance, it lets you see exactly how many users were playing any Sega title yesterday, how many sessions were played yesterday, how many hours were played yesterday by all of Sega's users. We can then drill further into that, and because of the events that we're collecting from the games, we can look at what kind of hardware people are using to play the game. So what graphics cards they're using, what's operating system, processor, RAM, display resolutions, display counts, and this is really valuable when working out how to benchmark minimum specifications for titles going forward based on what your consumers are currently using in terms of hardware. We also do a lot of more kind of deep analysis of games. So for Football Manager, for instance, we collect over 200 different metrics from the game, ranging from every match that you play, we collect that information, every transfer that's made. It's all sent to our endpoint for analysis. So this is just an example of a Power BI dashboard for Football Manager, and this is just showing a breakdown of what competitions people in Brazil choose to play as or play with when they start a game of Football Manager. And as you can see, or maybe you can't see because it's a small screen, but the Brazilian National First Division is the most popular league in Brazil. This isn't actually that interesting, but it can be more interesting when you look at things like when you bring into account things such as licensing discussions with certain leagues, such as the American MLS. And the MLS, no one in America actually manages MLS teams, but the MLS still ask for quite a lot of money for the MLS to be included in Football Manager. So we can actually go to the MLS and say, look, no one's actually managing as your teams in the game anyway, so that could potentially bring costs down in terms of licensing. So that's the kind of thing that this data is used for. This is just a dashboard showing all player transfers in Football Manager. So on the left-hand side there, for whatever reason, I've selected a player called Matteo Darmian, who at this point played for Manchester United. And as you can see at the top right, he signs for Lazio quite a lot, and Newcastle, strangely enough, and Fiorentina. And this, again, it's all just used for game balancing this data to make sure that players are selling for the price that they're worth, and there's nothing strange going on in the game. So again, game balancing, we collect every single human match result. So how many matches are played, how many goals are scored, how many goals conceded, how many times humans win and lose, and what team they're managing. And this allows you to make sure that, for instance, if players are managing as a top team like Manchester City, they're not losing every single match for whatever reason. Or when they're managing a terrible team, they're not winning every match for some strange reason. And it allows them to work out that the code that they've developed is accurate. So this is just a slide to show that basically you can choose any competition here. So I've picked League One in Britain for some reason. People play with Sunderland most often and win the league a lot with Sunderland. We can then choose Sunderland as a team, and then just down here we have a breakdown. We have a breakdown of all of the competitions that people have won with Sunderland. So amazingly, you know, 6,500 people have won the Champions League with Sunderland. So it's interesting stats like that you can glean from this data. Yeah. As mentioned before, we translate the IP address into a physical location down to postcode level. And this map is purely really for vanity purposes, just to show you the kind of heat maps that you can create by getting data down to a fine granularity in terms of latitude and longitude. So we can zoom into just England to see where people are playing Football Manager. Then we can just zoom into the Lake District. I'm not entirely sure why I picked the Lake District, but anyway, that's a heat map of people playing Football Manager in the Lake District for you to look at. It's the key benefits that the studios get from this data. So they can track the key metrics: daily active users, monthly active users. Very, very important data for a game studio. We can track pirate usage, so how many pirates are playing the game and how many legitimate users are playing the game. Again, very important information. Preparing for license discussions, tracking success of new leagues. The German league was added last year, and you can work out, are people actually playing with the German league or not? Why people are stopping to play the game? Are they losing money? Are they losing runs? You know, how successful are new features? Are you spending hours developing a new feature for Football Manager when potentially no one actually wants it or no one actually wants to use it? So you can find out how successful these new features are. And also the studio director at Football Manager likes to tweet out stats from it, so he likes to tell people how many people are playing yesterday or whenever. So another problem that we've had in the past at SEGA is actually democratizing this data to people, because it's difficult through just Power BI alone or Tableau alone or Excel in some circumstances alone to actually centralize this data in one place and people know where to go to and where to look to find whatever data they need. So we developed a portal using Drupal, which is basically just a big portal of reports that have been created by various teams around the business. Again, that's for self-service. People can just come to this portal, find what they need, whether it's they want to look at reviews, whether they want to look at retention, crossover between titles, whatever they want to look at, they know where to come. And also, this report's open to anyone in the business to come and have a look at, so it's not blocked off from any specific studio or person. So if anyone has a question they want to answer, they can just come to this portal, and it just helps democratize the data throughout the business, which has been a real struggle for us in the past to get people actually using this data frequently. Just some interesting stats that I've pulled out. So the most popular team, this is actually Football Manager 2018, which was a couple of years ago. It was Manchester City with 881,000 games, starters Man City. They then go on to sign Paulo Dybala from Juventus for an average price of 64.8 million. That then in turn leads to 62,000 Champions League wins and 6,800 of those on penalties. And I put this stat in basically because of my hatred for Man United, but there's 7 times more Man United fans in London than there is in Manchester. Sorry, players, not fans. So I like to include that stat. We've used it for tracking piracy in the past, so Endless Space 2 is another SEGA title, a space simulation title, very complicated. I've never played it, but I don't think I want to. It's running on 235,000 PCs, legitimately, at the time of this deck being created. And there's 208,000 people playing illegitimately pirate copies of the game. 53,000 of those are in Russia. 5,800 of those are in Moscow. And then again, with the postcode level accuracy, we then know that there's 290 in this specific district of Moscow. I'm sorry for picking on Russia there, by the way, but it was the obvious target. But there's plenty of countries that are where there's a lot of pirates. Coming to the end now, actually, shortly. You'll be relieved to hear. I'll just show you a couple more slides. This is an example of a game balancing report. So, at the top here we have the beta version, the version of the game that was released prior to the release of the game for people to test. And as you can see, on the left-hand side, you have a faction called the Cravers, and they win 70% of the time. That was that one. And then on the right-hand side here, you have the Time Lords, which is another faction within the game, and they were only winning 38% of the time. So from a game balancing point of view, you want those percentages to be far closer, so it's equally as difficult or as easy to play with whichever faction you choose to play with in the game. So after analysing that data, using some of our reports and deep diving into Redshift, or however they want to get access to the data, you can now see, once the game was actually released, that every single faction was roughly the same in terms of difficulty to win or lose with, maybe varying by a couple of percentage points. So that's the kind of value that people have got out of this. So current and future. So primarily using Elasticsearch's APIs and WebSockets, we feed data back to the websites in real time from our platform. So at the bottom here, we have a ticking total of how many staff have been hired, the total value of hospitals, diagnostics time and treatment revenue in a title called 2 Point Hospital, which is one of SEGA's new titles. So this is constantly on the website, just ticking over as people are playing the game. We then do some community activity using the live stats, so people can compete, so games can compete against each other in terms of kind of who can get the most hours played on their game over a short period of time. And if the game that gets to 50,000 hours played first, there's like free content released for that game, etc. So it's a way of involving the community quite closely. This is another example of exactly the same thing. This is Endless Space 2. You can't see this, but down there it's telling you how many star systems have been discovered in the game and what percentage of the total that is. And as soon as that total hits 100%, then it releases some additional free content or downloadable content for the end users. So we have this kind of stuff available on the websites. And it proves very popular. Feeding data back to the games. We were working with a game which was actually displaying the data from our platform within the game as you played it, but then that game got canned, so I've taken away the screenshot, so I can't really tell you much more about that, I'm afraid. And the final very valuable, most valuable thing probably about the data that we collect is being able to communicate back with the customers. So as we're collecting all this data, we're also linking that data with email addresses and contact information for customers, whatever that contact method might be. And then you can communicate with that customer and send them targeted. I say targeted, that makes it sound bad. It's meant to be it's meant to be good for the customer, but we can then kind of send them more personalized, that's a better word, isn't it? Emails and communication for depending on what games they're playing and how they're playing the games. So just as an example, with 2 Point Hospital, if someone's never played, so at the top left, if someone's never played 2 Point Hospital, we'll send them one email saying, how about playing 2 Point Hospital? It's a great game, come and buy it or download it or play it for free for a weekend or something. And then if they're lapsed, so they were playing 2 Point Hospital, then gave up, we then send them a completely different email saying, how about you come back and have another go? We'll give you this free content to tempt you in and whatever. If they've completed 2 Point Hospital, we'd send them a completely different email saying, look, you've obviously completed the games, there's not much we can sell to you here. However, how about downloading this new expansion pack for the game and getting a whole new levels? Again, just really giving them a more personalised email rather than just blanketing everyone with the same thing. And then for people that are currently playing 2 Point Hospital and enjoying it, we just wouldn't email them and they'd be left unpestered by SEGA. So that's proving very valuable at the moment for improving our CRM. And finally, machine learning and artificial intelligence. I don't know anything about machine learning and artificial intelligence, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in that. However, Stanley, who's sat over there, he's doing a presentation at 2:30 in one of the rooms over there on ML and AI. So if you're interested to know how SEGA uses it, then head over there. And that's it from me. I think I'm just about on time, so thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me now. If you want to just have a chat, then I'm around all day. So thank you very much.